We have seen the functioning of UGC. You have served as the UGC chairperson, and you have worked closely in UGC in public. So, what according to you was the need of this bill, sir?
Thank you for this opportunity to discuss with you.
Yes, sir.
You see, in India, the higher education sector is expanding very rapidly. And we have now more than 1,200 universities, more than 50,000 colleges in our country, and about 4.5 crore students.
Yes.
And there are four major regulators in our country: UGC for general education, AICTE for technical education, NCTE for teacher education, and Council for architecture education. So put together, these four regulators alone manage about 90% of the students in the higher education sector. But the challenge for our educational system is that when they want to start multidisciplinary programs, or if they have these four kinds of programs in the same university, they have to approach multiple regulators. And often these regulators have overlapping jurisdictions and also contradictory regulations and frameworks. And that makes it very difficult for the educational institutions to start new programs and to innovate and provide high quality education to our students. And that's the reason why NEP 2020 said that the entire regulatory system in our country should be revamped. And the idea of a unified, harmonized regulator was first placed in the draft National Education Policy, which was released in 2019. And then there were year-long discussions on that. And the idea about the unified, harmonized regulator was then embedded in the NEP 2020 policy document. And during the last 5 years also, there have been several discussions, and the introduction of the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan bill is actually a logical trajectory of the various discussions that have taken place during the last 5 or 6 years. Now, if you look at why we want to regulate higher education, the reason for that is to ensure that our higher educational institutions focus on providing quality education, which is outcome based, to make sure that our higher educational institutions become accountable and they protect the interests of the students. And that's the reason why we need to have regulation. And the VBSA, the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan, is an apex umbrella body. And under this body, you will have 3 distinct verticals: a regulatory council, accreditation council, and a standards council, with very distinct responsibilities and operational domains. So therefore, in the coming years, when VBSA is established, there is going to be a very simplified, transparent, inclusive, and responsive regulatory system in our country. And this is a very, very good intervention, a very timely intervention that the government of India has taken.
Sir, you were closely involved, that was presented by Education Minister. So what are the major reforms, if you can tell us, what are the major reforms that are part of this bill, sir?
So let us look from the perspective of the students, because the students are the key stakeholders in our education system, and they are the future of our country. In the VBSA bill, if you see, there are clauses which protect the interests of the students. For example, once the VBSA becomes a reality, every educational institution should mandatorily have an easily accessible student grievance redressal system, because our students also undergo all kinds of stress and anxiety, and it is important that their grievances are addressed in a timely manner, in an accessible manner. And another important thing that you will find in the VBSA bill is that students can actually give feedback on the kind of education that they are receiving. the kind of infrastructure that is made available to them, and what are the student welfare measures implemented in the educational system. And the student feedback is an important component while deciding the ranking and the accreditation of these institutions. And therefore, the institutions will become more responsible, more accountable to the students. So this is from the students' perspective. And from the institutional perspective, if you see, currently many institutions, when they have to approach these regulators, they submit the data to multiple regulators. So there is a lot of work in collecting this data and submitting to the regulators. And that takes away their attention, which otherwise they could have focused on developing better pedagogical approaches, doing good research. In the new system, the regulatory council will have one single digital platform on which all educational institutions are mandatorily asked to provide data and publicly disclose information on the kind of programs that they are offering, the kind of faculty they have, the infrastructure that they have, what kind of outcome-based education they are providing, and how the students are doing in terms of their placement, in terms of how many are establishing, let's say, startup companies, how many are moving to the higher education, and most importantly, the audited information of all the financials of the educational institution. Everything should be uploaded on this single portal. And multiple agencies can access this data in order to accredit, in order to rank. That is one advantage. And number two, the public can directly access this information and see how these educational institutions are doing. So from that perspective, it is one of the important transformation in our regulatory system, because the educational institutions will become directly accountable to the society who are examining this data. So like this, there are many other transformations that will be introduced once the VBSA comes.
So the name of VBSA, when it was introduced in the parliament, earlier it was known as HECA, then it was introduced as VBSA. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say about the name and the criticism around it, sir?
Let us look at how many words are there in this name. There are 4 words, right? Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan. Bharat, every Indian knows. So out of 4 words, 1 word is already known to everybody. Viksit, we are all familiar with Vikas, Vikasam in South Indian languages. Vikasit means progress, development, that everybody knows. Shiksha, almost everybody knows, right? So you see, it's also important for us to take pride in our own Indian roots and Indian languages. I am very happy that Indian words are used in this new system. But of course, you can also use English words such as regulatory council, accreditation council, standards council. But we are also working on giving importance to Indian language medium even in higher education. UGC is working in coming up with digital resources, write new textbooks in Indian languages. So therefore, as an Indian, I think all of us should take pride in naming the new regulatory system using Indian words. And most of these words are familiar across the country.
So the criticism around it is that, sir?
Variations of these words are there, right? For Bharat, it's there in our constitution. As I said, Vikasit has variations. Vikas, it's a common name across the country. Mm-hmm. So all our Indian languages are in some way or the other, they are linked to each other, right? There are many common words across Indian languages. So therefore, what I say is that we need to take pride in our own Indian roots, Indian ethos and Indian languages. So therefore, Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan is a very appropriate name for this new regulatory system.
So there are three verticals or three under one apex body. Earlier there were three main bodies: UGC, AICTE, and NCTE. Now for the common person, common man, how would you explain that these three bodies were already there? Now three councils. How would you explain what is the difference between these three councils from the three bodies?
Right. So let me take the example of one body, yes. UGC. Yes. UGC does multiple things. For example, it regulates, it sets these standards, yeah. It gives the approvals, and then the NAC, the National Accreditation Assessment and Accreditation Council, is also one of the institutions of UGC. So generally, if you look at the higher education literature or the practices in higher education across the globe, it is said that if the same organization does multiple activities, there can be conflict of interest. And that is why in VBSA, what we are doing is the regulatory aspects of UGC, AICTE, NCTE, and the Council of Architecture will be brought together, and they will be under one vertical, regulatory council. So similarly, the Accreditation Council will have only accreditation as its main function. Currently you have NBA, you have ranking system NIRF, and then you have NAC. The responsibility of the accreditation vertical is to create an ecosystem so that multiple accreditation councils, independent accreditation councils can actually accredit, assess and accredit institutions in different disciplines. And similarly, the standard setting activities of all these organizations, UGC, AICTE, NCTE, and COA, right, they will come under the standard setting council. The UGC, AICTE, and NCTE, they will be subsumed in the new the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan. The COA will continue to exist, but its regulatory powers will become part of the regulatory council. So by clearly delimiting the activities of each of these verticals, there is bound to be no conflict of interest. And from the institution's perspective, I will give you how having one single regulatory council will help. For example, let's say in a university, you have affiliated engineering colleges, and those engineering colleges come under AICTE, and AICTE has its own regulations, for example, minimum qualifications for appointment of teachers. Now, the universities also have engineering programs. They have their own school of engineering or college of engineering. But these engineering colleges, they don't come under AICTE. They come under UGC. And UGC has its own minimum qualifications for appointment of teachers. Now, imagine in the same university, the engineering faculty in College of Engineering will have one regulation, and the engineering faculty in the College of Engineering in the university will have another set of regulations. Now with one single regulatory council, you will have harmonized, uniform regulations across all domains of education, irrespective of whether it is teacher education or engineering or general education. You will have harmonized, simple regulations. So that is the advantage of having these three distinct councils under VBSA.
So when NEP was in Education Ministry has said that funding will remain with Ministry of Education. That was also the case. Ministry used to give to UGC, UGC used to give to different colleges. So I just want to understand from you, why was funding, there was no separate vertical for funding? Right. And sir, don't you think it will dilute the very purpose of the apex body or this new bill, that is decentralization of power, if all the funds are with the Education Ministry, sir?
Now, let me explain this with some details. Yes. Because funding includes multiple components. If I say a university is receiving funds, the university will receive funds to take care of the salaries, pension, infrastructure, maintenance, research, right? Now, when UGC gives the funds to the central universities, it is mainly for salaries, pensions, maintenance, those kind of areas in which UGC gives. Now, we have three kinds of institutions in our country. One is the institutions of national importance, such as IITs, NITs, ISERs, and other national institutions which have been established through an act of parliament. And even now, the funding to those institutions for salaries, pensions, and maintenance, etc., it goes directly from the Ministry of Education. It doesn't pass through any other agency. And then you have the other category of institutions which are the central universities. We have about more than 45 universities which function with UGC. Currently what is happening is their funds are given by Ministry of Education first to UGC, and then the funds are transferred to the central universities. Now in the new system, the Ministry of Education will devise its own mechanism to minimize the delays of passing through UGC, either directly or some other better mechanism they will devise, and the funds will go directly to the central universities. Now the third category of universities are the state universities. So you have the state funded state universities and then state established private universities. The private universities manage themselves, but the state funded universities, either in the previous system or in the oncoming new system, the state governments will continue to fund these universities for their salaries, for maintenance, for infrastructure, and so on. So therefore there is no major change in the funding system, other than the fact that for the central universities, the fund will go directly instead of going through a regulator. But there is another important component of funding, that is the research funding. So the research funding is required for purchasing of state-of-the-art equipment, for creating infrastructure in the educational institutions. Now, one way of getting this fund is to collaborate with the industry, and you can directly get that funding to the institutions. The other way is government funding. But government funding in the existing system, you have multiple channels such as DST giving funding, you have DBT giving funding, you have other agencies giving this fund. So what Government of India has done is they have harmonized all these channels of funding, and they have established what is known as ANRF, right? So through ANRF, the research related funding is given to any educational institution in our country without looking at whether they are public institutions or private institutions. The only condition here is that this funding is given through a competitive project evaluation. Yes. If you demonstrate your capabilities and if your project proposal is of national interest in emerging areas, you will continue to get the funding through ANRF. So therefore the entire funding scheme is streamlined through ANRF, and where the funding has to be given by the respective ministries, such as Ministry of Education, the funding will go directly to the educational institutions.
So, but you don't act wrong according to them. They will not provide funding to them. This is what teachers are claiming, that the Education Ministry can anytime stop the funding if they want to, if their views are not aligning with the university. Do you think this will happen, sir?
First of all, the new regulatory system that we are going to have, it is not a top-down system. Yes. It is more of a collaborative, inclusive system. Yes. Let me explain. In each of these councils, regulatory, accreditation, and standard setting council, you will have state government representatives, you will have representatives of the state universities, you will have representatives of INIs, and whatever regulations and frameworks that are going to come, they will come through a broad-based round table kind of consultations. So therefore, there is no centralization of any power here, because it is a more of a collaborative and participative system. And two, if you look at, as I mentioned, we have 1200 universities in our country, more than 1200. Yeah. Out of that, we have 540 private universities and 514 state-funded universities. So more than 1,000 universities are actually established by the state governments, and they are established through the state assemblies. So therefore, there is no question of any body stopping the funding to those institutions, because it is the state government which is funding them. And similarly, for the central institutions, the funding is associated with their performance, outcome-based education. So as Ministry of Education has said, that they will also consult the regulatory council and look at how these institutions are performing and link the funding to the performance of these institutions and outcome-based education. So it is always going to be a consultative mechanism rather than a centralized power. So I don't believe that VBSA is a top-down approach. It is a very, very inclusive and consultative process.
So though you mentioned it is a consultative process in the case of disagreement, so the critics are saying that this is the most important part where everything will be done through Education Ministry, and in the case of disagreement, final say will be of Education Ministry. How do you see this clause?
See, this act is going to be cleared by the Parliament, right? So whenever, such as UGC Act, which was passed by the Parliament in 1956. Now UGC comes up with some broad guidelines to regulate the higher education. But if any state government comes up with an act which is directly in conflict with these broad guidelines brought by the UGC, then the central act will prevail over the state act. So it is not anything new. Not just only in higher education, in other areas of governance also, the central acts passed in the Parliament supersede the state acts in case there is a conflict. So it is not anything new that is introduced in VBSA. So therefore, it's an existing system that is followed.
Sir, if we talk about the constitutions of these bodies like apex body, when we say, so what critics are saying right now is that it will come under the government sphere, the appointment of people. So they will appoint people to their who they like, and there will be less bureaucratic. There will be more bureaucratic people into this system, and less professors and teachers. How do you see this criticism that is coming this way?
Right. So if you look at the clauses, what qualifications the persons who are going to be part of these councils, what qualifications they should have, it's very clear that they should be, eminent academicians with more than 10 years of experience as a professor, and they should have a good administrative knowledge of the higher education system. So these are very clearly mentioned there. And also if you see, for all the central institutions such as the institutions of national importance and the central universities, the heads of these institutions are appointed by Honorable President of India. So the same procedure is followed here.
So nothing new in this, this criticism, sir.
Right. See, each council has a total of 14 members. And out of that, the states and union territories will be represented through a rotation process. So therefore, all states and union territories will have an opportunity to be part of the deliberations. The clause also says, another clause, that if there are specific issues pertaining to a discipline, pertaining to any state, the councils can actually invite the representatives from different regions, different disciplines, and take their inputs also. So therefore, it is a participative system, collaborative system, and all voices will be heard.
So what about the penalties? The penalties will be if there is any flouting of norms or something like that. And sir, if we are giving the entire power to regulatory body to penalize penalize the universities, will there be are we giving them a very much power that they can misuse, and there is a chances of corruption also? Can you give us the details on that?
First of all, you see, as an academician, I believe that our higher educational institutions are responsible institutions. They are institutions which are contributing to the social good by providing good quality education to our young people.
Yes.
And by implementing NEP 2020, we want to bring many reforms such as providing multidisciplinary education, experiential learning, so that our students, holistic education, so that our students will become solution providers, they will become critical thinkers, and take our country to the next level by developing new technologies and scientific discoveries. And in order to do that, the regulator has to become a facilitator. The regulator has to give as much autonomy as possible to the educational institutions based on their performance outcomes. So VBSA will continue to do that. But however, there could be some institutions which are fly-by-night institutions, institutions which are giving fake degrees. In those cases, the new system will have the authority to take action, right? But even that also following the principles of natural justice, they will be given a show cause notice, they will be given an opportunity to come and represent, and after all tools are exhausted, finally action will be taken. So therefore, the good institutions which are contributing to the social good, they have nothing to worry. They can continue to focus on their teaching, learning, and research activities and grow to be some of the best institutions in the world.
So what was the earlier?
As I said, that the institutions which have been established through a due process, either through parliament or the state legislative process, there is hardly any reason to take any punitive action against them, because they have been established by the government and therefore they are expected to be responsible. But however, for example, when a university offers PhD programs, UGC has PhD regulations. The regulations mention how a student should be guided through the research journey, how students' thesis should be evaluated, how students should be admitted in PhD program. So if there are any violations of that, who is going to be the sufferer? It is the student. So we need to protect the interests of the students whenever there are violations. So in such cases, the university may be asked to give an explanation why by violating these regulations, you are affecting the student interests. So as a regulator, we come forward and protect the interests of the students by telling the university that either you follow the regulations or you face action, right? So it should not be construed as universities being punished if they are violating something. It should be seen in a positive sense that we are collectively working to protect the interests of the students. That should be our top priority in our educational system. Protect the interests of the students, provide them high quality education so that they become the builders of our nation.
Sir, amid all the criticism that is there around VBSA bill, what are your last words to tell the people that this is a remarkable bill and it will help higher education system into developing into something bigger and will take it to the standard of global standards, sir?
This is beautifully expressed by NEP 2020 using two phrases. One phrase NEP 2020 has used is light but tight regulation.
Yes,
Light means a simplified, less bureaucratic regulation and also more and more autonomy to our educational institutions who are performing well. That is a light. And a tight means a focus on transparency, accountability, and integrity, and outcome-based education. So that is the tight part of the regulation. So both of these are going to be part, it is reflected in the VBSA bill. The other important phrase that NEP 2020 has used is that our education system should be rooted but futuristic. Rooted means the education that we provide, it should be rooted in the Indian context. And it should also be futuristic. I'll give you an example. If we are building our space technology, if we are building newer technologies for our defense, if we want to enhance our nuclear power by 10 years in the coming years, 10 times in the coming years, it is our students who have to work in those areas from an Indian context. But if you look at other challenges that India and also globe is facing, such as climate change, environmental degradation, extreme poverty, these are all global challenges. Therefore, the education that we provide to our students should also enable them to be futuristic so that they can address global challenges. So the VBSA will ensure that the regulatory system in our country is simple, is predictable, so that our higher education system will grow and enable our students to become nation builders.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.